The grand hall of the Dragon Empire gleamed under light that seemed almost alive, reflecting off scales, horns, and the polished stone floors. The air buzzed with anticipation, and every noble dragon in the room leaned forward, curious about the Emperor's latest decree. At the center of the hall, a tiny hatchling shivered in a shallow nest of velvet and silver threads, its small wings folded tightly around its body. The Emperor's golden eyes scanned the assembly before landing on the hatchling. His voice was deep and cold, echoing through the hall like rolling thunder. This hatchling is weak, worthless, unfit to ever lead, fight, or even survive. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some dragons shifted uneasily in their seats, others pretended not to notice. A few high-ranking nobles snickered quietly, exchanging knowing glances. The hatchling lifted its head, its eyes wide and bright, trying to meet the Emperor's gaze, but the effort seemed small and fragile. Its scales, still soft and uneven, caught the light awkwardly, giving it a patchy, almost unfinished appearance. Servants scurried forward. They were careful to avoid looking directly at the hatchling, afraid of the Emperor's wrath. They reached down to pick it up, but the tiny dragon flinched, curling its body tighter as if shielding itself from the world. Its claws clicked softly on the floor, a timid sound compared to the heavy steps of the court. At the far end of the hall, a human moved quietly among the shadows. Rollin, a simple barber assigned to palace maintenance, carried a small leather bag filled with scissors, combs, oils, and other human tools. He was not important, not even noticed by the dragons, except by the hatchling who glanced briefly at the human with something like hope. Rollin did not step forward immediately. He had learned quickly that humans were not welcome in the Emperor's court except to work quietly and disappear. Yet, something about the hatchling pulled at him. It was not strength or skill or beauty that drew his attention. It was fear, raw and clear, that even the Emperor's words could not hide. The Emperor spoke again, louder this time, as if trying to crush even the smallest flicker of hope. Do not waste my time with this creature. Remove it from sight. Let it learn its place, if it survives at all. A noble dragon barked laughter, sharp and cruel, and the hatchling flinched. Its tiny wings twitched nervously. The Emperor's gaze swept across the room, catching the movement. Silence, he commanded. The hall went quiet. Only the soft shuffle of the servant's claws against the floor broke the stillness. The hatchling was lifted from its nest and carried toward a back chamber. It tried to squirm, its voice barely audible, a high, trembling chirp that made the surrounding dragons ignore it even more. They did not care. They saw weakness as nothing worth saving. Rollin followed at a distance, careful to stay unseen. His heart pounded. He had no authority here. He was a human, small and fragile compared to the dragons around him. But he understood something these dragons did not. Fear could hide potential, and neglect could destroy even the strongest spirit. The back chamber was dimly lit, with tall windows that allowed just enough light to cast shadows across the floor. The hatchling was placed in a corner, surrounded by cold stone walls and scraps of old blankets. It tried to stand, then slipped, and a soft whine escaped its mouth. The sound made Rollin's chest tighten. He knelt by the door, studying the tiny creature carefully. Its scales were dull, its wings bent at odd angles, and its eyes were wide with confusion and sorrow. No one had touched it except to move it. No one had cared for it except to criticize. And yet, in those bright, unguarded eyes, Rollin saw something. Something quiet but strong, a spark the dragons had refused to see. He slowly opened the door, making sure no one noticed. The hatchling froze, wings tucking even closer, but it did not cry out. Rollin knelt lower, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, soft cloth, just like he used on the hair of palace workers. He did not speak at first. He just offered the cloth, letting the hatchling smell it, feel it, and decide whether to trust him. The tiny dragon hesitated, then sniffed cautiously, its tail flicking nervously. It allowed Rollin to wipe the dust from its soft scales. The human's hands were gentle, careful not to hurt or frighten it. Each touch was slow, each movement deliberate. The hatchling began to relax slightly, curling less tightly and leaning toward Rollin's warmth. Outside the chamber, the court continued with their business, unaware that something extraordinary was happening in a small, forgotten room. The Emperor's proclamation echoed through the halls, but it had no effect here. The hatchling, once declared worthless, was beginning to feel something new: safety, curiosity, and even a small flicker of trust. Rollin sat quietly, combing through the hatchling's uneven scales, carefully untangling knots and smoothing rough edges. He did not rush and he did not speak much. Humans often understood that quiet care was more powerful than loud words. The hatchling watched him closely, its small eyes tracking every movement. Slowly it began to extend one tiny wing, testing its strength. Rollin encouraged it softly, holding it just enough to prevent it from falling. Hours passed like minutes. The hatchling stretched, yawned, and finally let out a soft, contented chirp. It leaned against Rollin's hands almost as if thanking him. The human smiled quietly, though he knew this moment would be invisible to the emperor, to the nobles, to anyone in the court. It did not matter. He was not here for glory. He was here because he had seen worth where others saw none. For the first time, the hatchling lifted its head and looked directly at Rollin, not the emperor. There was no fear in its eyes now, only something like hope. A spark had ignited, a quiet promise that even in a world ruled by dragons who valued power above all, small acts of care could make a difference. Rollin packed his tools slowly, careful not to startle the hatchling. He whispered softly, "I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after that. You are not alone." The tiny dragon chirped again, a sound more confident than before, as if it understood the words even though it did not know their full meaning. Outside, the grand hall continued with its pomp and judgment, but inside the small chamber, a tiny life had begun to grow in strength, unseen and unclaimed by the empire that had dismissed it. And somewhere deep in Rollin's chest, he felt a quiet certainty. This hatchling, so small and weak in the eyes of the emperor, would one day surprise the world. Rollin returned to the small chamber the next morning before the palace had fully awakened. The halls were quiet, the echo of dragon claws soft on stone floors. He carried his small leather bag filled with the tools he always used, soft brushes, tiny scissors, cloths, and oils. Today he was not a barber for the servants or nobles. Today he was simply a human who had noticed a life others had ignored. The hatchling was awake, perched in the corner, wings still folded tightly against its body. Its scales glimmered faintly in the morning light, but they were still dull and uneven, covered with dust from the palace walls. Its eyes widened at the sight of Rollin, not with fear this time, but with something like recognition. The hatchling made a small chirping sound and shuffled forward, cautiously leaning against the wall. Rollin knelt slowly, letting the hatchling approach him. "Good morning," he said softly. "Let's see how you are today." His voice was calm and steady. Humans often understood that gentle words could calm a creature even stronger than themselves. The hatchling blinked, its tiny wings twitching slightly, but it did not try to run. He began to clean the hatchling's scales carefully. His hands moved slowly, rubbing away the grime and gently smoothing rough patches. The hatchling shivered at first and used to this kind of attention. But as Rollin worked, it relaxed. One claw tapped softly against the stone floor, a small sign of trust. Outside the chamber, dragons went about their day. They saw only their own reflections in polished floors and did not notice the quiet work happening behind closed doors. To them, strength was fire, dominance, and speed. Caring for a weak creature was meaningless, a waste of time. They had no idea that Rollin was teaching the hatchling something that even the emperor could not command. He carefully examined the hatchling's tiny wings. One was bent awkwardly, and the other had a small tear near the edge. Rollin took a small brush and began to smooth the damaged area, massaging the wing gently. "There," he whispered. "Just a little care and you will be stronger tomorrow." The hatchling leaned into the touch, closing its eyes for the first time in days. Rollin cleaned the hatchling's claws next, trimming the edges so they would not catch on the stone floors. Every movement was slow and deliberate. The hatchling seemed to understand that he would not hurt it, that humans could be patient in ways dragons rarely were. Dragons measured worth by firepower and sharpness, but humans measured it by persistence, patience, and small acts of kindness. The tiny dragon chirped softly, a sound almost musical. It stretched one wing tentatively, testing its strength. Rollin supported it carefully, letting it flap gently against the air. The hatchling stumbled once, then regained balance, its eyes shining with something like pride. Humans often helped others grow without expecting anything in return. Dragons, on the other hand, only noticed strength that was obvious and loud. Rollin reached into his bag and pulled out a small cloth soaked in warm water. He dabbed it gently on the hatchling's head, cleaning away dust and grime. The hatchling tilted its head, letting the human work without protest. Every gesture of care, however small, was building trust. Every moment of patience was teaching the hatchling that not all creatures sought to dominate it. Hours passed quietly. The hatchling began to explore its small space, stretching its wings and moving in ways it had not dared before. Rollin watched, guiding without forcing, letting the dragon discover its own strength. He whispered softly when it faltered, encouraged it when it tried something new, and celebrated the smallest successes with a quiet smile. In the grand hall, nobles continued to discuss strategy, lineage, and strength. They had no idea that the worthless hatchling was learning something more valuable than firepower. Dragons could teach power, yes, but humans taught patience, resilience, and trust, qualities that often mattered more in the long run. By midday, the hatchling was moving confidently across the floor, flapping its wings with small, controlled movements. Roland cheered quietly, clapping his hands together. The dragon chirped in response as if proud of itself. The human's voice was steady, encouraging, and patient, a contrast to the harsh commands it had faced from the Emperor. Roland cleaned the hatchling's tail next, untangling small knots and brushing it gently. "See? You are learning. You are strong in ways they cannot see," he said softly. The hatchling's eyes followed him, wide and trusting. It leaned closer, testing the human's hands, and even let out a small playful chirp. Outside, the palace remained unaware. Dragons did not see value in patience or care. They could not understand that small kindness could create strength where raw power failed. They only cared about the loud, visible, immediate results. But Roland knew something they did not. The hatchling's potential had nothing to do with fire or teeth or claws. It had everything to do with confidence, trust, and guidance. As the afternoon sunlight shifted across the room, the hatchling rested against Roland's legs, tired but happy. Its breathing was steady, its eyes bright, and its wings more flexible. The smallest acts of care had created a small change, but a lasting one. Roland smiled quietly. "Tomorrow we do more," he whispered. "Little by little, you will grow." For the first time, the hatchling chirped in a way that seemed almost like laughter. Roland laughed softly too, knowing that dragons outside would call this meaningless, and the Emperor would still see it as weak. But he also knew the truth. What mattered most was not recognition by the powerful, but the growth of the small, unnoticed life under his care. The human packed his bag slowly, making sure to leave the hatchling comfortable. He glanced at the small dragon, who now looked confident enough to explore the corner of the chamber. "You are learning," he said softly. "And one day you will surprise them all." The hatchling chirped again, wings stretching in the late afternoon light. Outside, the Empire remained focused on glory, power, and dominance. Inside, in a small, quiet chamber, a tiny creature began to understand what strength truly meant, through patience, care, and a human who believed in what others called worthless. And Roland, a simple human barber, knew he was witnessing the beginning of something the Dragon Empire could never see coming. The news spread quietly at first, whispered from servant to servant, then from guard to guard, and finally reaching the ears of palace nobles. A human barber was tending to the hatchling the Emperor had called worthless. Some dragons snorted, others laughed openly. A human? Caring for a dragon? The idea was absurd. Roland arrived at the chamber as usual, carrying his small bag. The hatchling looked up at him, wings twitching with excitement. It chirped happily, a sound so bright that even the dusty light of the chamber seemed to warm. Roland smiled softly. "Good morning," he said. "Let's see how strong you've become today." He began by brushing the hatchling's small, uneven scales. The creature flinched at first but quickly relaxed, leaning into the human's hands. Roland worked slowly, carefully, smoothing rough patches and checking for weak spots. Each small touch seemed to give the hatchling more confidence. Outside the chamber, the court was in chaos. Nobles had gathered near the hallways, speaking in loud voices. "Can you believe this?" one hissed. "A human dares to train a dragon. Do they not know their place?" Another noble laughed harshly. "It is meaningless. The hatchling will never be strong. This human is wasting their time. A barber cannot teach what dragons are born knowing." The Emperor had heard the whispers. His golden eyes narrowed as he watched the little human go about his work from afar. He found the situation irritating, even insulting. To him, dragons were born with power and dominance. Nothing a human could do mattered. Yet, there was a quiet tension in the palace. The hatchling, once timid and shrinking, now moved with slightly more confidence. Roland lifted one of the hatchling's tiny wings and examined it. The edge was still slightly torn, but it was stronger than the day before. He smiled softly. "Care and patience make more difference than fire alone," he whispered. "Do you see that? You are learning." The hatchling flapped its wings tentatively, nearly falling over once but recovering quickly. Roland laughed quietly. "Good. That's it. Keep trying." The tiny dragon chirped back, more playful this time, a sound that echoed softly against the stone walls. Word of the hatchling's progress reached the court. Dragons gathered near the doorway, peeking in, whispering and snickering. They saw the small dragon moving more confidently and the human carefully supporting it. Many found it ridiculous, impossible, or simply funny. One young noble dragon strode to the door, sneering. "Look at this," he shouted. "The Emperor calls this hatchling worthless, yet a human dares to train it. How pitiful." Roland looked up briefly and nodded politely. "Yes," he said calmly. "It is small and weak now, but every day brings a little strength." The noble's laugh was sharp and loud. "Strength? From a barber? You expect us to believe a human can teach dragons anything?" Roland smiled softly, unfazed. Humans had learned patience for survival. He had learned that quiet care could grow strength where power alone failed. The hatchling stretched its wings again, flapped, and even took a tiny hop forward. The human's words were proven true, even if the dragons refused to see it. The Emperor called for silence, his voice booming through the hallways. "If you wish to mock, do so quietly. Let the human continue. We will see how long it takes before the hatchling fails." Roland continued his work as if the Emperor had not spoken. He carefully cleaned the hatchling's claws, trimmed rough edges, and applied a small oil to the damaged wing. The hatchling leaned into his hands, trusting him completely. In the quiet chamber, it chirped softly, testing its strength and moving a little faster than before. Outside, the nobles whispered and laughed. Some doubted the hatchling could ever survive on its own. Others thought the human would fail and be dismissed. Still, some curious eyes watched quietly, intrigued by what was happening. They had never seen a human do this before. Roland guided the hatchling across the chamber floor, holding its wings lightly to prevent it from falling. Each step the dragon took was careful, deliberate, and growing more confident. The human's hands did not force it. They guided, supported, and encouraged. The hatchling flapped its wings again, and this time, it lifted off the ground for a brief moment before landing softly. Its eyes sparkled with excitement. Roland clapped quietly, and the hatchling chirped in response. Even the Emperor could not hide his surprise. The hatchling, once timid and fearful, was showing signs of life, strength, and confidence. The progress was slow, invisible to most, but undeniable. The human had not used magic, fire, or threats. He had used care, patience, and understanding, things dragons did not value openly. The nobles snickered again, but some voices were quieter this time, unsure how to react. A small dragon moving confidently with the help of a human was not supposed to happen. Humans were weak, insignificant, and expected to obey. Yet here was a human doing what dragons could not, teaching a hatchling to believe in itself. Roland finished his work, standing slowly and looking at the tiny dragon. Its wings were flexible, its claws clean, and its eyes bright. The hatchling moved around the room, testing its strength and balance. It chirped happily, a sound that was almost music to human ears. "Tomorrow we do more," Roland said softly. "Every day a little stronger." The hatchling chirped in agreement, flapping its wings once more before settling beside him. Outside, the court continued to whisper, laugh, and doubt. The Emperor maintained his composure, but even he could not ignore what was happening behind the closed door. A human barber, small and weak in the eyes of dragons, had begun to shape strength where none had existed before. Nobles could laugh, the Emperor could mock, but neither could stop the quiet change growing in the corner of the palace. For the first time, some dragons began to notice that strength was not always about fire, teeth, or claws. Sometimes it came from patience, care, and the belief of a small, determined human who refused to be ignored. Roland packed his bag quietly at the end of the day. The hatchling leaned against him one last time before curling up to rest. He whispered softly, "Sleep well. Tomorrow we try again. You are stronger than they see." Outside, the Empire remained loud, proud, and dismissive. Inside, a quiet revolution of care and patience had begun. And neither the Emperor nor the nobles realized that the human barber was already teaching a lesson dragons would never forget. The palace was quiet that morning, but a different kind of tension hung in the air. Today was the day the hatchling would be presented to the Emperor again. Roland knew that dragons outside measured strength by fire, claws, and dominance, but he had seen something stronger grow in the tiny creature over the past days: confidence, trust, and curiosity. He packed his bag carefully, checking that each tool was ready, though he did not know if they would even be needed. The hatchling was waiting, perched in its corner, wings stretching slightly, eyes bright and alert. It chirped softly when it saw Roland, a sound that carried more confidence than before. Its small claws tapped on the stone floor as if testing the ground. The hatchling was no longer the trembling creature the Emperor had declared worthless. Every movement showed growth, however quiet and subtle it might seem to dragons. Rollin approached slowly, holding out his hands. "Ready?" he whispered. The hatchling chirped again, fluttering a wing in agreement. Today was not just about care or grooming. Today was about letting the hatchling make a choice. When the Emperor arrived, the grand hall filled with the usual pomp. Noble dragons bent in submission, their eyes curious and judgmental. The Emperor's gaze fell on the hatchling. "Bring it forward," he commanded, his voice deep and commanding. The tiny dragon stepped forward, hesitating only for a moment before lifting its head proudly. Its wings twitched, small but steady. The court whispered and laughed quietly. Some dragons shook their heads. A human barber, still standing behind the hatchling, simply smiled faintly and allowed the creature space to act. Humans often knew that true strength came from giving others the freedom to choose, not forcing them to obey. The Emperor leaned forward. "Hatchling," he said sharply, "show me why you are worth anything. Speak." The hatchling hesitated, blinking at the crowd. Dragons expected it to remain silent, fearful, or to chirp weakly as it had in the past. But something inside the tiny creature had changed. It looked at Rollin briefly, as if drawing courage from the human's quiet support. Then, in a clear voice higher than the deep tones of the dragons, it spoke, "I am not worthless." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some noble dragons froze in shock. The Emperor's eyes widened. He had never expected a hatchling to answer, let alone speak with such certainty. The words were simple, but their meaning carried weight that no fire or claw could match. I may be small. I may not breathe fire like others. But I can learn. I can grow. And I will choose my own path. The hatchling's wings lifted slightly, a small but proud gesture. And today I choose to stand beside the human who believed in me. Silence fell over the hall. Dragons stared at the hatchling, unsure how to react. The Emperor, who had called it worthless only days before, now felt an unfamiliar stir of doubt. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, searched the room and finally settled on Rollin. Rollin stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands visible but empty. "He has learned what we humans know well," he said calmly. "Strength is not always fire or teeth. Sometimes it is patience, trust, and the courage to grow without fear. He has learned because he was given care, not commands." The Emperor's jaw tightened. The nobles whispered angrily, muttering that a human had no right to speak in such a way. Some dragons were outraged, others confused. Yet no one could deny the truth in the small hatchling's words. The hatchling flapped its wings once, then again, demonstrating balance and control. "I will grow strong," it said softly, "not to dominate but to protect and understand. I am not worthless." Its voice, though small, carried across the hall, echoing in the hearts of all who heard. Rollin knelt slightly, giving the hatchling space while offering support. The tiny dragon climbed onto his shoulder, resting briefly as if to show gratitude. The court could not understand this bond. To them, dragons were supposed to be strong alone, not influenced by humans. But Rollin understood. True growth often required guidance, patience, and someone to believe in you when others would not. The Emperor's voice was steady but heavy with surprise. "You speak well for one so small." He paused, looking at the human. "And yet, a barber has taught a lesson I cannot ignore." Rollin nodded quietly. "I have only helped him see what he already had inside. Even dragons can fail if they are afraid. Fear hides strength." The hatchling chirped happily, wings stretching again, this time boldly. It was no longer trembling. Its eyes met the Emperor's, and though small, there was pride and confidence in that gaze. "I am not worthless," it repeated. "I have learned what matters most." The court was silent, unable to interrupt the moment. Nobles whispered behind closed claws, some embarrassed, others skeptical, but all noticing the change. A hatchling, declared worthless, had spoken clearly, choosing its own path and showing that care and guidance could grow power where commands could not. Rollin patted the hatchling gently, still keeping space between them. "Today," he said softly, "you have shown the world what it means to grow without fear. Tomorrow we will grow even more." The Emperor remained seated, eyes thoughtful. He did not laugh, he did not scold, and for the first time he realized that strength was not always obvious, not always loud, and not always measured by fire. Sometimes it was small, quiet, and nurtured in ways dragons could not understand easily. The hatchling flapped its wings again and chirped happily, looking up at Rollin. The human smiled faintly. He had not planned to impress the Empire, but that did not matter. What mattered was the small creature before him, now confident, brave, and unafraid. Even the nobles, proud and loud, could not take away what had happened. The hatchling had chosen its path, spoken its truth, and shown that care and belief could outshine fear and mockery. In the quiet chamber of growth and patience, a tiny life had found its voice, and it would never be ignored again. The Emperor leaned back in his seat, eyes narrowing, not with anger but with consideration. Roland packed his bag quietly, knowing he had completed the most important step. The hatchling had found its courage, and through it even a human could teach dragons something they had never learned before. The hatchling chirped once more, wings stretched proudly, standing beside the human who had given it the gift of belief. And in that moment the Dragon Empire realized without words that even the smallest voices could change the course of great halls and powerful hearts. The palace was unusually quiet the next morning. The Emperor sat in his golden chair, eyes thoughtful, watching the hatchling and the human Barber quietly from across the hall. The nobles had gathered, still murmuring about what had happened yesterday. The small hatchling, once declared worthless, was now perched confidently on Roland's shoulder, wings half spread, eyes bright with curiosity. Even without fire or sharp claws, it commanded attention simply by being alive, brave, and unafraid. Roland knelt beside the hatchling, gently brushing its small, soft scales. "Today we continue to grow," he whispered. The hatchling chirped softly, stretching one wing, testing its strength. The human's touch was calm and steady, and the tiny dragon leaned into him willingly. The Emperor spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Roland, you have done something no dragon could do alone. You have helped this hatchling see itself differently. Explain this to the court." Roland stood slowly, keeping his movements calm. He looked around at the assembly of proud dragons. "Your Excellency, my role has never been to fight or dominate," he said simply. "I have only cared. I have only given guidance and patience. This hatchling had strength already, but it needed someone to help it see that it could trust itself. Sometimes, care and belief are more powerful than fire or claws. That is what humans have learned through generations of survival." The court was silent. Nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Many did not like the idea that humans, whom they considered weak and insignificant, could teach a lesson to dragons. Some murmured complaints, but the Emperor's eyes held them still. Roland continued. "Strength is not only measured by power. It is measured by understanding, patience, and courage to act when no one believes in you. This hatchling is not worthless. And in helping him grow, I hope you can see that humans are capable of more than you think." The Emperor's golden eyes scanned the hall, resting briefly on each noble. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we have been blind in our pride. Perhaps strength is not only what we can see." He paused, his gaze returning to the small hatchling. "You have shown us that growth can come quietly, without fire, without dominance, but with patience and care. That is a lesson this empire will not forget." The hatchling chirped happily, flapping its wings with confidence. It hopped lightly from Roland's shoulder to the floor, then back again, testing its balance and newfound courage. Nobles could not hide their surprise. Dragons who had once scoffed at weakness were now watching with a mix of confusion and admiration. Roland smiled faintly. "The hatchling is learning what all creatures must learn. Everyone has potential even when it seems hidden. Humans know this because we often survive when we seem the weakest. We care for what others ignore and we grow quietly without demanding recognition. This is what has helped the hatchling, and this is what humans can teach you if you choose to see it." The Emperor leaned back, considering the words. He was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then it is decided. Humans in this palace are not to be dismissed as weak. They are to be recognized as guides, as beings who understand patience, growth, and care." Nobles whispered and shifted in their seats. Some were proud, some confused, some angry. But none could deny the truth. The Emperor had acknowledged that humans had something to teach dragons that power alone could not provide. The hatchling, sensing the calm approval of the Emperor, flapped its wings fully for the first time. It chirped loudly, a sound of joy and freedom. Roland held his hands gently, letting the hatchling land on his shoulder. The tiny creature leaned against him, showing trust and connection. The court, for the first time, noticed the bond between human and dragon. Over the following days, humans were given new roles in the palace. They were not servants or entertainers. They were mentors, guides, and caretakers, trusted to observe, to advise, and to teach. Dragons learned that humans had patience, insight, and courage that often surpassed even their own expectations. The hatchling grew stronger every day, not through fire or combat, but through confidence, trust, and understanding. It learned to navigate the palace halls, explore its own strength, and even speak with dragons much larger than itself. Roland remained by its side, guiding, encouraging, and supporting. The tiny dragon's voice became clear, and its presence became a quiet but undeniable influence throughout the empire. Historians would later write that the Dragon Empire did not change because of war, rebellion, or fear. It changed because a hatchling learned to trust, and a human refused to ignore what others dismissed. The empire realized that strength was not only in power, but also in understanding, patience, and care. The emperor, proud yet humbled, allowed Roland to continue his work. He did not give him titles or wealth, for that was not what the humans sought. Instead, he granted respect and recognition, publicly acknowledging that humans were capable of influencing dragons in ways they had never imagined. The hatchling, once called worthless, grew into a wise and calm dragon, respected not for dominance or firepower, but for intelligence, trust, and courage. It remained close to Roland, showing that the bond between species could transcend power and pride. And in the quiet chambers of the palace and in the halls where dragons once measured worth by fire and teeth alone, the simple truth was remembered: humans could teach lessons no dragon could, not through force but through care, patience, and belief in potential. The emperor watched the hatchling and the human one last time that evening. He said nothing, but a small smile touched his lips. For the first time he understood that the strength of the empire was not only in its dragons, but in its humans too. And the empire, silent yet changed, learned to respect what it had once dismissed. Roland packed his tools, the hatchling chirping softly beside him. Together they walked through the palace halls, quiet and confident. Dragons watched, some with doubt, some with respect, but all aware that something important had shifted. The empire had learned something new: humans were not weak. They were patient, clever, and capable of shaping strength where others could only see weakness. And that lesson, taught quietly by a human barber and a small dragon, would be remembered for generations to come.